Today on GTFO, the 6th-seed Philadelphia Fusion took out the first-ranked New York Excelsior in a best-of-3 series that concluded Saturday night, proving once and for all that even gods can bleed in a fight with a hungry underdog. I'm Gryf.
I'm Trop.
And I'm Fireclaw. Let's break it down.
Alright, so obviously Philadelphia Fusion getting the win over NYXL was massive. No one saw it coming, or at least the vast majority of people didn't see it coming, but what I really want to get into to start things off is just how they were able to pull this off. So, Fireclaw, give us some thoughts. How do you think Philadelphia Fusion was able to pull off this win over the number one team in the league?
I think it's really important that we talk about Wednesday. That was the first time these teams have fought on this patch. And NYXL seemed hesitant to run the Hanzo. They refused to run the Hanzo when Philly was running it and didn't really run any mirror comps. They were really sticking to their dive. And I feel when you look at the skill that EQ brings with the Hanzo, not matching them up really put them at a disadvantage. And I think that's honestly why we saw the 3-0 on Wednesday start.
Well, Philadelphia Fusion has always been a team that's given Nixel a lot of trouble. I mean, they've only been reverse swept by them. They've always gone up on them. They've always seemed to take the maps, but they never seem to. They have a choke, an inconsistency in the Philadelphia Fusion.
Mm-hmm. And something I want to bring up is going into this, it's interesting because the New York Excelsior had so much information that Philadelphia Fusion did not have. Obviously, there's scrims and things like that, but we don't have to get into that. You know, New York Excelsior was able to see Philadelphia Fusion on stage. They knew what they'd probably be running. In Philadelphia Fusion, they didn't pull out anything surprising against New York. They ran pretty much what you'd expect. So that's why it's so interesting that they were able to, especially on Wednesday, get the 3-0 when New York had so much more knowledge going into it.
Well, that was one of the things I was curious to ask you two is, do you think, obviously having more time to prepare is a boon. New York had an advantage being able to prepare ahead of time, but they hadn't played on this patch in a competitive setting before. Do you think that had anything to do with it? Did NYXL not realize how Philly was going to play it? They could see the matches, but they've never been against it, in that competitive setting. Do you think them not playing on this patch hurt them? Or
I would have to say that it didn't. Because the team that's going to win is the team that prepares their own strategies. Nixel had more time to work on their own game, and I think them playing into Philly's game was definitely to Philly's advantage. I mean, they have some of the best DPS in the league. They've topped the charts up there, and Gryf is going to bring some serious firepower to his team. And them just rolling with the frags that they get just off their DPS lineup and them setting the pace of the game is going to play right into their favor. Nixel is playing right into them.
Speaking on Philly's aggression, you saw it on both Dorado maps, the Junkertown map. You see where it's 30 seconds left, and the announcers are talking. They're like, NYXL is going to have one more chance here. But Philly is just unrelenting in the pressure. And I just don't know if NYXL was ready for it. NYXL lost all three of those matches because they just got staggered at the end. They were never able to regroup and actually give one good fight. NYXL consistently pulls out wins, and whenever it seems like it's impossible. They did it all season long, and you look at these matches here and you realize that Philly almost knew NYXL had that reputation, and they were unrelenting in the pressure. Well, and that pressure.
No, I want to move kind of, from jumping off that point into, kind of covering both games, and a huge part, you said it yourself. New York Excelsior, that's the clutch team. They're always, when it comes down to crunch time, they have those clutches. They're pulling it out of nowhere. But the man who is always behind all of these clutch plays, you see it constantly, the person who is pulling New York from the brink of defeat is Sabiobi. And it wasn't just that he wasn't doing that, it's that maybe he didn't have the opportunity to, because you had New York bouncing back and forth between Sabiobi Pine, Sabiobi Libero, Pine Libero. So there was this triple, these three really great DPS, but it seems like when you needed him to be there, Sabiobi either wasn't in or wasn't pulling out those huge plays that he normally does.
One of the things that I'm not the New York coaches, but it almost seemed like they weren't sure what they wanted to run. They didn't know if they wanted Pine and if they wanted Libero, if they wanted SBB. You saw them with their subs with Animo taking out Arc. Like, you almost have to wonder, did NYXL get a little confused? Did they not know what they wanted to run? Because SBB has always been that clutch player. But at the same time, if you have SBB and Pine in, something they ran a lot, you're missing out on the flexibility of Libero, who I would say is the most flexible player in the league. And it's just, you have to wonder, did they not prepare Pine and SBB for the roles they would need to fill? Or did someone not pull through? They just didn't seem nearly as prepared as Philly on both days.
I would definitely have to agree. When Nixel came down, they're normally a team that's very methodical with their pushes. They know when to pull back and they know when to aggress on their opponents. But what I saw a lot was Philly taking a lead, winning a fight, and then rolling with it. They would stagger them. They would stagger them again. And Nixel played into the staggers. They kept the fights going too long, and they weren't taking their normal methodical approaches. When Nixel started running compositions like goats and stacking up tank lineups for the last 30 seconds of a game, it almost felt like they had submitted to the flow that Philly was putting onto them.
I want to touch on that. That's so huge because we were talking about preparation going into this, right? And you would expect that New York would have so much preparation. They had seen what Philly has done so far, but when it came down to it, you're right. They got locked into Philly's game. They were playing Philadelphia's game. Philadelphia seemed like the team who had gone into this and had so much more preparation when it was the exact opposite. And New York is known for being methodical, for having this coaching staff that is able to keep these players, doing exactly what they need to be doing every time. They pick apart teams on such, systematic level. So I want to know, I want to pose the question, what happened with the coaching and with the preparation that resulted in this? Like, where do you think New York kind of went wrong here?
For me personally, their tanks, Giannis and Mano, they just did not seem to, I don't know if it was coordination or maybe Philly was really focusing them down, but you see NYXL lose their tanks in the fight. And this is the thing. NYXL is a team where everybody comes together. They're one big unit. And when you lose the main tank like that, it crushes the team comp. Whereas Philly is solely based on their DPS. You see Carpe and EQ carry fights. You see Carpe on Kings Row win a fight Philly had no business winning. Philly runs their DPS to win fights, while NYXL runs as a team. And in this meta where you see these big plays coming out with Widow and Hanzo, you have to wonder if sacrificing a tank for a pick on Boombox or Neptuno normally is a team fight, especially in the other stages. It's not that way in the playoffs anymore. When Carpe and EQ can pull out wins, Giannis and Mano going down is huge. And maybe Philly was focusing them, but NYXL was always losing tanks. Meko too, always losing tanks at starts of fights. They were always the first picks on NYXL side.
Well, you bring up the tanks and Hotba being subbed in for Poco. Whenever Hotba was on the Philly lineup, I saw that the NYXL took advantage of Hotba's play style, but they could never really pin down Poco. Poco is more elusive on his tank role. So when the swaps came over from Philly side of things, that also made me raise an eyebrow.
I would also like to point out before we go into Poco and Hoppa, how well Sato played in these matches. I think it is a lot to do with NYXL running dive a lot more and trying to focus healers and the DPS. It opened up so much space for Sato, and Sato was the best main tank, I think, in my opinion, in this match. He was consistent on the Orisa, Winston, and Ryan all across the board. You even look at Kings Row. The Kings Row match was a stomp, and that first point's taken by Philly because I believe it was Mano is just in a bad spot as Orisa. And Sato almost falls into the same trap, but like I said, New York, based on their tanks, they lose Mano, the whole fight's over. Philly loses Sato, and they're still able to pull it out. And part of that is because of how good Poco is.
So it would seem like Philadelphia then, they had kind of that rock in that their main tank, it was Sato the whole time, and Sato was pulling through. And we were touching on the switches that were kind of happening. Well, you have a main tank situation over on New York where they're back and forth between Mano and Giannis or Janice, all the time. Now you have the same thing on the off tank position on Philadelphia. Do you think that made a difference though? Because it almost seemed like the team that was making more substitutions was always in a worse place, but Philadelphia had that main tank always, on point, whereas the main tank role was the one that was kind of back and forth over on the New York side. Do you think that had a big, effect that it was the main tank that was being subbed out?
I think the way you pointed out that it was the team making more switches that seemed to be doing worse, because NYXL is making switches on every role. You had Animo coming in for Arc, which I still am not sure why. It has to be for the Lucio because Jay Jonax was famous before his Zenyatta for his Ana. So Animo shouldn't be in there to play the Ana unless they want to run Ana Zen, but still, the Ana comps weren't really working for NYXL. I don't know why Animo's in for Ana. And then you look at Yanis, and Yanis is more of a disruptor. Mano kind of holds a position and takes that space where Yanis likes to throw the enemies off, separate them, cause chaos. But Philly was not getting baited into that, and Yanis was getting punished for it. And then you look at the DPS issue. Do they run Pine, SBB, Pine, Libero, SBB? No matter what they ran, they didn't seem to be able to cover all the comps with their DPS. Animo is just not as good of a Mercy as Arc. And Yanis was getting picked, and Mano wasn't taking the space. Their switches, they seemed that they really didn't know what to do.
I'm going to have to defend Animo's Ana because I felt like when they brought in that switch there, that was in my mind a successful use of Ana. Even though her kit is lackluster and it's a little bit weaker, I feel like Animo did a really good job.
They definitely made Ana work a couple times, but I'm going to say they lost just as many matches as they might have won with the Ana. It wasn't like it was a defining factor. And then again, I do want to say that a lot of times the matches they lost had Jay Jonak on the Ana. Maybe without Jay Jonak, Zen, NYXL was lost. And another thing I want to point out is maybe NYXL is lost without their Zen. You saw a lot of Hog being played by the flex supports. Jay Jonak did not look as strong as Boombox on the Hog. And when you realize that NYXL, MVP, Jay Jonak, their best damage dealer on Zenyatta isn't allowed to play that role, that has to hurt NYXL, right? Would you guys agree?
I would say absolutely. But I do want to, just going back to the Ana, obviously New York had a really good map on Hanamura, and I believe Jonak was on the Ana during that map. I do think what it boils down to is you want him in a position that he feels most comfortable with. That's, I think, where the issue arises, because you put him on the Ana, he's really comfortable, and he's able to make plays. He knows Ana's kit, he knows where he needs to be making plays, and he's able to do it because it's a hero he's comfortable on. Same with Zenyatta. Obviously, we know that about Jay Jonak's Zenyatta. He's incredible. But you move him to a hero that maybe he doesn't feel as comfortable with, something like the Roadhog, something that he doesn't have as much time with, and now he's not making the plays that he needs to be making when you need him to be doing that. I mean, he's the MVP of the first season of Overwatch League. He has been a playmaker all this time. When you put him in a place where he can't make plays, you're running into a lot of trouble.
When Philly Fusion's lineup is matching up what a lot of people say are the best team in the league, New York Excelsior, who consistently performs. You've got Boombox, who matches up Jay Jonak. You've got Neptuno, who's matching up on him. He's matching up Arc. They're tanks, Sato and Hatba, or Sato and Poco. They're matching up New York's lineup. I feel like Philly's lineup overall was pretty equal with New York's lineup, but I feel like Carpe and I feel like EQO, those guys were just playing on another level compared to the other DPS. They're outclassing their opposition.
Let's talk about EQO. Is he the best Hanzo in the league? Because everyone said it was Libero for the longest time. And you look at these matches, and can you say Libero's the best Hanzo anymore? When his team lost, when Hanzo is such a cornerstone of the meta?
It's hard to say because obviously we didn't get to see Libero on the Hanzo as much as obviously New York fans would have liked. And another thing is that based on the strats that they seem to be wanting to play, it seemed like they weren't prepared for Hanzo, which is insane to think about because everyone knows Hanzo is huge in this meta, but it just seemed like maybe Libero wasn't putting in as much time on the Hanzo as someone like EQO. Now, EQO is an incredible Hanzo. I don't know if we can definitively say that he is the best now after seeing, that kind of showing from Libero, because when Libero did play Hanzo, he was insane. He was popping off Dragon Strikes left and right. But we have known EQO to do the exact same thing.
So what I want to touch upon here is we talk a lot about teams needing to play their own game, and that being like a way they can win. If they play their game and don't try to play the enemy's game, they win. NYXL, as much as they sometimes did play Philly's game, they also tried to play their own game, I think, to a fault. You saw them running dive a lot, which in the meta just was getting shut down a little bit. The double sniper, the crossfire, them not being able to put as much pressure on. It was them playing their game, almost hurting them too. Was running that dive just too much for them to overcome?
I think what it is isn't, when we say playing Philly's game, we mean they're playing into Philly style. Philly is hyper aggressive. As soon as they get those picks that they need, they're going to be diving on you, they're going to be jumping on you, they're going to be chasing kills down, and they're going to be making it so that you won't be able to get that next fight off for a long time because of the staggers they're able to pull off. Now, New York, you're right. When it came to strategies, when it came to comps, they were playing kind of what they knew best, and that was to a fault. But you look on the other side of things and kind of the meta game of the game, like we're chasing kills, that sort of stuff, those high level things, Philadelphia was forcing them into their game while New York was strategy-wise playing too hard on their own game. So New York all around the board, it just seemed like failures from a coaching level to a player level to just everywhere. This team suddenly fell apart. And it's just crazy to think about that this is the same New York Excelsior who were so dominant during the regular season.
Well, this is a great time to bring this up. As much as Monte Cristo would like you to disagree, was Stage 4 a sign of NYXL's cracks in their armor?
When people are saying they're throwing. Yeah. I don't think they were. I think they were trying those games.
Because you saw them barely pull a win against Houston. You saw them lose it to Valiant. You saw them lose to Boston. I believe when Boston had an awful Stage 4. You saw what looked like weakness almost. And part of that was you saw a lot less Tracer in Stage 4 due to Bridget and the Pulse Bomb nerf. And then people were kind of already running Hanzo in Stage 4 even without his buff. Is NYXL too specialized? Are they not flexible enough?
I think they have that one, the flex player that just... he can do everything. It's Libero, right? Obviously, Libero is so good at just picking up different heroes. He can fill in so many places. But when you're running in a situation where he doesn't, I think, excel as much at flexing as some other people. And that's when we have to come back to guys like EQO, guys like Prophet as well, who can go to any hero and just play at an insane level. Libero is very good on many different heroes, and he might be, like I said, the best Hanzo in the league, but I don't think he is that kind of flex god the same way EQO and guys like Prophet are.
Speaking of flexibility, not just in DPS, but you saw Hotba bring up the Tracer, you saw Boombox holding his own, maybe even better than J. Jonax, Hog. I think Philly's lineup, this might go back to preparation, but they were definitely more prepared to flex onto roles than I think NYXL were. J. Jonax looked uncomfortable, even on his Ana when they did well, and on the Hog. And then you look at characters like SBB and Pine. Pine played a little bit of Tracer on one map and swapped off because his Tracer was just not nearly as good. Pine wasn't ready for the Tracer. He's there to play Widow. And if he can't play Widow, then he can't really do too much. You saw him pop off a little bit on the Hanzo. But if he's on the Hanzo, then Libero has to be on something else. And Libero's the good Hanzo on that team. So are they not flexible enough? Philly just looked more flexible.
All right, so we are running a little bit low on time, so what I want to do is get some final thoughts. What one big thing do you think made the difference in this matchup? We're going to go to Trop first. What do you think?
I think it just comes back to playing into Philly style. I don't think New York Excelsior was doing things that they normally would do to win games. Their methodical approach just wasn't there. They just didn't find their style. They didn't get their momentum going through the first series. The first set, at least the 3-0 that surprised and shocked everyone, that was definitely an eye-opener. And seeing the next set come down to a 2-2, once again, I don't think New York had enough time to adapt from the first set. I think that they were still making slight mistakes like they were in the first set, and that led to a 3-2. And definitely playing into Philly's game was one of their downfalls.
All right, Fireclaw, over to you.
For me, it has to be, this might seem a little weird, but I feel them refusing to play what we'll call meta on Wednesday and losing that 3-0. I think it really made New York question themselves. And getting 3-0'd on Wednesday just broke them almost. They looked defeated. They came into the next match hopeful, but they were worried, I think. And I think that loss on Wednesday really, really crushed them and was the catalyst for them eventually collapsing here.
And I think that kind of ties into what I would say was the big thing. And New York just didn't look prepared. It came down to preparation for me. And that's a huge part of why they went down 3-0 on day one. It seemed like they came into this, they didn't have a touch on the meta. It seemed like they didn't have a touch on what they wanted their roster to look like going into this. They were making those switches back and forth all over the place. And ultimately, Philadelphia Fusion, they had a game plan. They focused on what they needed to do. They made New York play their game. And when it came down to the preparation and, going out there and just doing what they needed to do, Philadelphia Fusion was so far ahead. And that's why they got the win. And that's why they're going to be going on to the finals. With that, we are going to wrap up this video. Thank you for watching. Remember to like and subscribe if you did enjoy. I'm Gryf.
I'm Trop.
And I'm Fireclaw.
And this has been GTFO.